Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. There's no denying that over the course of the past couple of months, the Warzone meta in general has really expanded and become a lot more diverse. You could use a very wide variety of weapons, as we've talked about in various tier lists and meta overview videos in the past. But today, I want to look at a select few weapons that I would say are very underrated despite being pretty good in games. So as we break them all down, if you enjoy the video at any point, let me know by dropping a like on it. And if you're new here or if you have not subscribed yet, every day I got you covered with all things going on in COD, news, updates, loadouts, tips. You'll find it all right here. So feel free to hit that sub button and turn on those post notifications. So first up here, we've actually got the CX9, which according to Warzone Ranked, which is where I'm getting all the underrated stats from here based on the pick rate, only 0.18% of the player base is actually using the CX9, which is kind of crazy because out of a lot of the SMGs in the game, the CX9 is very, very good for sniper support. It's got good mobility, a good fire rate. Like, it's all around a very solid SMG. It doesn't obviously have the 10 attachment advantage that a lot of the Vanguard subs have, but this thing is not bad by any means whatsoever. I've actually had a lot of fun using this in the past. Now, it does have the one barrel that has the built-in suppressor, the CX38S, which is sort of like the monolithic integral, but to really maximize everything here, the mobility, the range, the control, all that combined, I feel like the best way to go about it is to actually run the monolithic per usual on MW weapons, and then also run the CX38 barrel, which is going to give you better range, velocity, and control. It does hurt your mobility some, but we are going to gain that back. Another great thing about this, 50 round drums, perfect for a sub, and again, hurting the movement a little bit, but that's not something we can't combat here because you've got something like the CXFR stock, which gives you a better movement speed and a better ADS, and it really doesn't hurt your control all that much because obviously we have so many other things helping out with that as is. Then for the final attachment, you can sort of mess around. I do know for a fact, if you throw on sleight of hand with the 50 round drums, the reload is insanely fast. So that's always nice to have. You could run a, attack grip, which is basically the Stippy Grippy with the better ADS and the better sprint to fire. You could run a 5mm laser or even attack laser here to get some better ADS or better stability there as well. Or you could run something like the Merc 4 grip, which also would be a great choice, getting some better control on there as well. Like, you got so many different options for this and so many different ways to build it, and regardless of what you choose, it's going to be a great SMG, which is one of the reasons that I love this thing, and I'm really surprised more people aren't using it. Now, following that, we got the Fennec, which actually is only used by 0.15% of the player base, so another one that almost no one is using. This thing up close, though, I will say it's a lot less versatile than the CX9. It's not really great for sniper support. This is definitely a secondary SMG meant for like 0 to 20 meters max, but in those 20 meters, this thing's kind of insane. That fire rate and that TTK are some of the best in the game, actually. It just, again, kind of suffers from the fire rate being too fast for the magazine capacity and still only having 5 attachments. But even with those drawbacks, this is still a pretty solid choice for an SMG. In this case, we do go for the built-in suppressor barrel, the deadfall barrel here for the better range, velocity, and keeping us off the map as well. Alongside that, we got to go for the 40 round drums. And like I said, that's sort of the drawback here. If this had 50, 55, 60, it could probably be very good, but 40 with this fire rate is going to hurt it a little bit, so that is something you have to take in mind. For the under barrel, I feel like Merc 4 grip is another really good choice. For the stock, you could honestly go for the no stock option, which is going to hurt your control a little bit, or you could go for like the CQS and get a better ADS speed. Both of those are pretty solid. And then for attachment 5, I'd personally recommend either going for attack laser or a 5mm laser, or something like the stipple grip tape for the better ADS and the better sprint to fire. Make it as aggressive as it can possibly be because you want to be within that 20 meter range at all times for this thing to be the top tier option that it could be. So making sure you have that mobility to get within that range and then dominate there is really ideal. Next up, we've got easily the highest skill gap weapon in this video, the FAL. This is only used by 0.12% of the player base, and this one I understand more because this is a semi-auto weapon, and most players just don't want to have to put in the effort to either master this weapon and make sure you have a really good trigger finger to be able to compete with it, or it's just, not something they have an interest in using because that high skill gap in general. It's either a mix of not putting in the work or not wanting to put in the work, or just recognizing, yeah, it's probably not worth the time because I could use a much easier weapon, right? So this thing does have an insane TTK, especially up close. Honestly, at all ranges, it's just easier to use up close and in some mid-range fights, but that semi-auto factor is a big drawback here that deters a lot of players from using it. That said, we all know this was a meta at one point in time for close range, and that setup honestly still works pretty well. Using the monolithic suppressor, obviously we want to stay off the radar. The marksman barrel is sort of that medium range to long range option, but the way that we're building this, it actually does work up close, and it helps out with the control, which is something these other barrels don't do. And when you're spamming it to try and get that fastest TTK, control is pretty ideal there. I also go for the tac laser here just to help out with that ADS speed a little bit. The 24 or the 30 round mags, both of these work just fine. 30 is a little bit slower, so we'll go for 24 in this case. Then lastly, no stock. This makes it a lot more aggressive and a lot more ideal for some of those close range fights. This to me is definitely a very niche setup, but one that I do still think is underrated just because it has so much potential. It's just way harder to use than most weapons in the game. Now, the MG82 is certainly a weapon that had a large fall from grace, you could say. Going into Vanguard, the MG82 is one of the top tier weapons in the game. It was one of the most dominant long range weapons in the game. We all know just how powerful and broken this was for so long. Now it's kind of like the Bren is the replacement to this, right? But this is only used by 0.08% of the player base now, which I'm really surprised by. I thought it would be closer to like 1% maybe, just because it is still very good. It just has more recoil than some of the other weapons out there. It still hits like a truck though. You just got to be able to master that recoil. You mount with this thing and it is an absolute laser beam, and it's going to be very tough to beat, in a one-on-one fight. First up here, we are going for agency suppressor, better control, better velocity. You definitely have to go for task force now. This offers more control than the match grade would in this case, so I feel like that's a pretty big advantage to have there and something you really need with the recoil pattern. Now we're going for the 3x optic as always on the Cold War guns alongside the field agent grip, and then you can sort of mess around with this 5th attachment. Some players like to go for the fast mag, maybe the 125 round mag. Other players might look for something like a Raider stock to help make it a little bit more aggressive in some of those medium range fights. There are a lot of good options here, maybe even something like a Serpent Wrap to get a better ADS. Really comes down to preference. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer here, but yeah, the MG82 definitely not getting the respect it deserves for still having a very good TTK with just a little bit more recoil. And then lastly, man, oh man, the SA87. I don't think people realize the TTK on the SA87 is honestly pretty good. Like, it is a relatively fast TTK regardless of what health you're playing at. The problem here is that it is very slow for an LMG, and the control, especially visual, does bounce around a lot, so like console players probably will not like this gun too much, and that reflects in its usage and its pick rate. 0.02% of players are using the SA87 right now. That said, if you can master this gun, it is a relatively solid choice. It's definitely a mid-tier weapon that I think gets severely overlooked because, sort of like the FAL, it's not the easiest to use. Here we are going for the monolithic suppressor for the barrel because this is an MW weapon. Very clear choice. We're going for the biggest barrel, in this case the 25.4 inch for that better range, control, and velocity. You also probably want to run the commando foregrip on here for that better control, alongside the VOK 3x optic as well. And then you can mess around probably with an extended mag is going to be the most viable choice here. 50 or 60 is going to work well. This thing's fire rate is pretty slower. It's slower than some other options here, so you don't run out of ammo too quickly. I feel like 50 is totally sufficient there. A pretty standard setup for an MW gun. Personally, I think this would be used a lot more if it just had slightly less visual recoil. Just like the MG82, if you mount with this thing, it's very easy to use and it will decimate enemies. People just don't like the fact that it's slow and it's kind of, wonky when it comes to the control. Totally understandable, but man, the weapons that we got to feature today, it's weird because all of them honestly do hold their own in this meta. Like, there's no bad weapon here. You could definitely get away with using all of these right now. They're just picked so little because they don't have maybe the 10 attachments, maybe because they have slightly more recoil or a little bit less mobility, but they are still good weapons at the end of the day. Definitely underrated in my opinion. That being said though, that's going to wrap things up. If you enjoyed the video, let me know by dropping a like on it. And if you're new here or if you haven't subscribed yet, every day I got you covered with all things going on. News, updates, loadouts, tips, and everything else in COD. You'll find it right here. So feel free to hit that sub button and turn on those post notifications. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day. And I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.